I don't think it's likely that any Muslim extremist is watching this video. But if they are, I just quickly want to say that I operate alone. There's nobody assisting me in any way in the making of this video. In fact, I'm also a heretic within Christianity, so there's nobody you can rightfully kill substitutionarily. In fact, I don't even have friends. You're probably wondering why I say that, so I suppose you have to explain. Well, my mother, who knows a lot more about Islam than I do, says that when Muslim extremists are unable to kill the person who committed blasphemy, they sometimes kill somebody who is in some way related to them as a substitute. So when, for example, a Christian here in the West commits an act of blasphemy, somebody needs to die. But because they obviously can't make it all the way to Europe, they kill somebody else as a substitute. Someone who is associated in some way with that person in question. So when a Christian commits blasphemy here, a Christian there has to die. So therefore, to the Muslim extremist who might be watching this, I am a heretic. I do not clearly belong to any group. So there's no substitute for you to kill. I operate completely alone. You must kill only me if you want to kill anyone over the contents of this video. But what I find strange is, how is it that Islam does have a thing like penal substitution? I mean, I have learned a couple of things at school, and one of those things that I learned was that one of the reasons Muslims think that Christianity is silly is because of penal substitution. Penal substitution is the idea that somebody can die for the sins of somebody else. You see this happen a surprising lot in the Bible actually, but the most iconic use of penal substitution is when Jesus dies on the cross. He dies instead of us. That is what happened officially at Golgotha according to Christianity. But some Christians, like me, are heretics who believe other things. But practically all of Christianity believes in substitutionary theology. And Muslims, I heard, find this very silly. So I find it strange that the extremists do subscribe to some form of substitutionary theology. It's almost un-Islamic. But then again, I also heard that in Islam there's a stone that can forgive sins. I don't really remember what's called again, and my mother knows all these things better than I. You know, I'm basically slandering things I don't understand. But I think that stone that can forgive sins is another example of an un-Islamic thing in Islam. But the other thing is even more un-Islamic, I think. It almost sounds like it has nothing to do with Islam. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. I'm actually in a hurry today, I've got a lot more things to do. So I really have to get to the point. What I wanted to talk about is the question of religious violence. Why does religious violence happen? The simple answer is, of course, the religion in question demands this violence. That's technically what's happening, because the violence is, of course, always predicated on some religious writing. So you could say religion just simply demands this violence. But there is more going on. It's not just a violent text and its violent interpretation. The cause lies deeper, because a violent text alone cannot call people to an act of violence. Naturally, on its own, without outside help, such a text can only call people to an act of hermeneutics, meaning a regular person does not immediately become violent after reading a violent verse. Instead, the verse invites people to interpret it differently. Because people are not born evil. I don't think people are born good either, but I don't believe that we are born evil. People naturally don't want a violent text. People that naturally don't embrace a violent text. So they have a stronger tendency to rationalize it into something peaceful. This is what I have personally found to be true. The violent verses will only ever seem violent to the uninitiated. The people who belong to the religion themselves see it only in the way hermeneutic contortionism has made them see it. So it's not just the violent verses on their own. Those would barely ever make anyone violent successfully, because people don't become evil instantly by one big thing. People have a far bigger tendency to become evil evolutionarily, step by step. Evil evolves, it does not appear. Villains have a complicated origin story in fiction as well as in reality. There's little things that push someone slowly to a violent side of their religion, and these little things play a far bigger role than the big things. What exactly those little things are that push them to extremism is hard to determine, but I think I found two. So I will tell you those two things, and I just invite you to speculate about the other things yourself. Number one, the greater good. Religions often have a greater good that is hard to understand, or even impossible to understand. The idea of the greater good is easy to accept because it does not feel threatening. But it does open a lot of doors. If there is a greater good that you cannot directly observe, the direct consequences of our actions begin to mean less. There's a little thing which is relatively easy to accept. Makes it easier to do something horrible. Number two, eternal punishment. This is something I've already talked about a lot, so I'll not go into too much detail. I also got a lot more stuff to do today. Eternal punishment is a little amazing because I find it strange that people find it easy to accept. But the fact of the matter is that people do accept this idea of eternal punishment very easily. Maybe it's because you're not personally involved in the punishment yourself. Maybe it's because it doesn't even really happen inside of our world. Maybe people just don't care as much about things that are really far away. But whatever the reason might be, people don't naturally find eternal punishment reprehensible. They'll accept it, they'll condone it, they'll advocate it. Not knowing what horrible blasphemy it is. And doing this, they say that there is a time and a place where a human being has no value. Quite obviously, this is a very useful idea to have in the back of your head if you are going to commit an act of violence. So this is also another thing that facilitates religious violence. You know, there's one bit in the Quran that I've always felt strangely attracted to. It's just a few words and it's a pure coincidence that I happen to know them, but they hold a certain power that no words in the Bible hold. It's about a punishment people sometimes get for breaking the Sabbath or for committing idolatry. Be apes, despised and hated by all.